So taking some of this data, we can start to build up a little bit of a plan about what we want to do with it. And in Komprise, our data management plan consists of a number of groups. And within each group is going to be one or more file shares that will have the same policy applied to them. So in that policy, we can do three things. We can move data. So we'll move it to a target. So the target is going to be another file platform or an object platform that could be on-prem, could be in the cloud. And when we move that file to that target, we're going to replace it with a dynamic link. So as far as the end user is concerned, the file appears to be still there. There's still a file with that name and that icon. But when they open it, or if they do decide to open it, bearing in mind, it's not going to be moved unless it was over a year old. But if someone does decide to double click on that file, it will open, and it will open seamlessly without having to deploy any agents. So the data is still there. It's still able to be used. It's just not being used at the moment. So we're putting it somewhere cheaper.
So yeah, I think actually you just answered my next question. So there indeed no agents are needed for this. This is actually something that works in the background?
That's right. Because we use sort of file system native constructs, so there's nothing proprietary. We're using symbolic links. We use some specific features of some of our partner file systems, like the NetApp, to do this so that an end user, on their desktop or from their VDI session, they need to open up a file, or maybe even an application needs to access a file. Look at medical systems, pathology systems that create huge volumes of data, terabytes a day. And that can just be for a small hospital. And that data is extremely important for a relatively short period of time. And it needs to be accessed very quickly for that time. But ultimately, you can't afford to have the capacity of the performance tier to store everything. So you need to find a way of being able to move that data somewhere a little bit cheaper after a period of time, but still be able to access it. When a doctor needs to get to that data, he's going to find the patient's records, and he's going to want to open that scan that he did last year. He's not going to want to wait for someone to go and get the data back from a tape, or even as I saw in one particular customer environment, for someone to go and switch the archiving server back on, which is the ultimate offline way of keeping your data. And it's not just moving the data that we can do with Komprise. We can actually take the decision that, this data is so old that ultimately we just want to get rid of it. It's already been backed up. It's probably sitting maybe on some year-end tapes that are happily in a tape vault somewhere. We can actually mark the data for deletion. Now, Komprise is not, it's very, very risk-averse company when it comes to data loss. So we don't actually delete any data, but what we do is we will move it into a hidden folder. So as far as the end user is concerned, that data is gone. The storage admin would then go in and clear and purge that trash folder eventually, once they're satisfied that the data really isn't needed. And that's what we call our confine policy. So again, we could set the policy to confine data that might be, in this case, over 3 years old. So that last section of data, that's the data we just want to delete. We don't need it. Yeah. And as we play around with these policies, the purple section inside the donut will change, and that will reflect how much data we could be moving to the target. And as well as that moving, we like to help our customers build up the business case, because doing this ultimately is to save some money, because you either don't have the budget or you'd like to spend some of the budget that perhaps previously would have been on the automatic storage refreshes on something more interesting, something that's actually going to bring a greater business value than just providing file storage. Yeah. And we do that with our cost model. Once you've got all this set up, you would activate your plan, and every 7 days, Komprise is going to run the policies. And that's just a default figure. You can make it more or less frequent if you like. But remember, we're dealing with cold data. This data is not really going anywhere. So it doesn't matter if it takes us a little bit of time to move it. You decided that you want to free up some capacity, so you move the cold data from that server to another tier of storage. Now, that server reaches the end of its life, what do you want to do? With a lot of platforms, and with even if that was sort of had some native tiering, there's plenty of storage providers that will automatically expand their cold data into the cloud. Problem is when you want to buy a new one, because how do you just move the hot data without having to pull the cold data back? And that's something that Komprise is extremely good at. We've got our own migration engine built in. And what this engine does is it will share by share allow us to move data between our old source and a new destination. So we buy ourselves a brand new server, and it's just going to move that hot data. And once we've moved all the hot data, we will update the symbolic links that we've created to point to the target. So we do it without having to rehydrate any of the cold data, which means that the migration is done quicker. It's under more control. We use an iterative technique which allows us to start the migration way before the planned cutover time. So one of the big traditional problems with migrations is that you have a necessary window to do that cutover in, and there's this big rush to try and get everything done within that window. Whereas with Komprise, we can start the migration weeks before, and we get down to the stage where actually we know we're only copying 1 day's worth of data. And once we get to that stage, we know exactly how long our cutover is going to take, because it's just that iteration of these are the files that have changed or were open during the last 24 hours. And that's just what we're going to be copying. Yeah. So it gives us a lot of control and the ability to reduce the potential outage windows caused by a migration, because they can be pretty significant.